Good afternoon. Welcome to a Livestream event sponsored by the National Catholic Reporter. I'm Heidi Schlumpf, NCR's executive editor, and today, a day after the inauguration of Joe Biden, our nation's second Catholic president, I'm joined with three guests. We're going to talk about the inauguration and also about the upcoming 100 days of the presidency. Our first guest is Michael Sean Winters, NCR's political columnist. Welcome, Michael.
Always good to be here.
And next we have Sister Simone Campbell, who I'm sure many of you know. She's the executive director of Network, which is a Catholic social justice lobby. Welcome, Sister Simone.
Great to be together on this great day.
And finally, we have a special guest today, Senator Tim Kane of Virginia, who recently wrote a piece for NCR's new series, which is called Building a Common Future, in which we asked a number of Catholics to give advice to President Biden for his first 100 days. So thanks so much for being with us, Senator Kane.
Absolutely, Heidi. I'm really happy to be on this call with NCR supporters.
Great. So today's event is interactive, and I want to remind you who are watching this that we would love to have questions from you. You can put any questions that you might have for our guests in the comment section, and they will get to us. We have about a half an hour today, and I'm going to ask a few questions of our guests, and then we'll get to your questions towards the end. So let's talk briefly about the inauguration. We're coming off of an amazing day yesterday. Senator Kane, let's start with you, since I believe you attended the inauguration. What's your impression? Were there any specifically Catholic connections that you noted, or how are you feeling the day after the inauguration?
Heidi, it was a great day. We were just sharing, even the weather cooperated because it was cold, blustery, and swirling snow when we got started. And by the end, the sun was out and warming the occasion in a way that seemed not coincidental. I think it's hard to convey the feeling of yesterday without also putting it under the shadow of my recent day at the Capitol when we were attacked for the second time really since the War of 1812, or the first time since the War of 1812, by a violent mob trying to stop Congress from carrying out its constitutional duty. That was a day that was infuriating and tragic. 5 deaths, injuries, arrests. And so what we needed to show the world yesterday and show all Americans was that descent into chaos and violence was the outgoing spasm of one administration, but a peaceful transfer of power on a sunny day was the first and very vivid impression of an incoming administration. And I think it delivered. There were many highlights of it. I loved the Youth Laureate poet because I thought her line about "we're not broken, but simply unfinished" really captures something about, an America that set an ideal before ourselves, the equality principle in 1776, and we've been steering toward it or drifting away from it ever since. But we've got so much work to do and so many people hurting and suffering, and they call us forward, but we don't have to view ourselves as broken. We can just view ourselves as on a journey that is far from over.
She did steal the show, didn't she? Just to follow up, so you mentioned the day that the protesters stormed the Capitol in that attempted insurrection. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that was like? Were you there that day?
I was in the chamber, and rare thing, I hadn't brought my phone with me into the chamber because I didn't want to be on TV looking at text messages instead of listening to the argument about the Electoral College. And so I wasn't getting the text from staffers saying, hey, they're breaking into the Capitol. A lot of my other colleagues were, and one at some point bolted for the door, and the security said, you're not going anywhere because we're going to have to lock you all in. They shut us into the chamber, these loud first glass doors and then the wooden fortified doors. We were there for about a half an hour hearing the rioters outside. They eventually cleared a path where we could get over to a committee room in the Hart building that was outfitted for us to continue to do our work. But when we got in, we all said, we're not doing our work here. You're going to get the chamber clear, and we don't care how long it takes, but we want to go back into the chamber and do it in the full view of the American public and finish it today and certify the new president and vice president. So it was a day never to be imagined, never to be forgotten, and God willing, never to be repeated.
Thank you. Going back to yesterday's inauguration, Sister Simone, I followed you on Twitter yesterday as you were commenting. Do you have any of your impressions, and what are you thinking about with the Biden administration going forward?
Well, I was so touched by many things, especially in the inaugural address. The words that stood out to me included the uncivil war that's been unleashed in our nation and needs to stop. Also, the urge that not all political disagreements need to become this raging fire, that we can bring some sanity. On the more humorous aspect, I did marvel at the Catholic references, and he had St. Augustine in there. And then I heard one of the commentators, political commentators, referring to this reference as St. Augustine, as if it were the city in Florida, as opposed to St. Augustine. So clearly, people are going to have to brush up on Catholic references. But I have to agree with Senator Kane that Amanda Gorman's poem was so powerful. Partially, I think, attributing that such a youthful person could so powerfully express this moment. And the piece that I was holding on to was the very ending where she says, "For there is always light. If only we're brave enough to see it. If only we're brave enough to be it." And I think that for me is, as a person of faith, is the challenge of now, the willingness to be light without being this political fire that devours everything in its path. And so that we find a way to create a social engagement, a conversation, and what Pope Francis talks about as a politics of encounter, where we want to meet each other. I took a lot of heart from yesterday's beginning. We're going to have a lot of growth to do, but at least it was a beginning.
So, Michael, Sean, you gave us your impressions of the inauguration in your column, which is available today at ncronline.org. And you also got into a little bit of some of the controversy that marred a little bit of the day, and we're already getting questions about that from our viewers. So perhaps you might comment briefly about the statement that came from the head of the Bishops' Conference, Archbishop Gomez, but also then the reaction from some of the other Catholic bishops to that statement.
Yeah, and I think it's important to start by echoing what Senator Kane and Sister Simone said, which was the day had this redemptive quality. This was a crime scene 2 weeks ago, and to see, Lady Gaga point to the flag, to see people coming through that arched doorway with the red draperies that had been really one of the real choke points between the police and the mob 2 weeks ago. And then that amazing poem, and then also, hats off Mike Pence for being there and being gracious when there was an enormous pressure, I'm sure, on him not to. So I just found the whole day redemptive, and that just made this letter that came from, or statement that came from Archbishop Gomez, it was so discordant with the tenor of the day. The day was about unity. It was, I said in my column, it was not a day for "on the other hand" comments. And for them to lead, obviously, I think the Catholic bishops in their role as advocates for public policy will need to sit down with the administration and express their agreement on issues and disagreement on others. But when you want to build a relationship, you don't do a shot across the bow like that on Inauguration Day. You schedule a meeting, you sit down, and as I put in my column, I think part of I think there's a group of bishops who are disposed to treat any Democrat in a very shabby fashion. But the fact that he's Catholic, the fact that he is now the most prominent Catholic in the country, the fact that he began the day by leading them to the political leadership of the country to Mass at the cathedral in Washington, there's a part of our church that this makes them crazy. Because he did more in 24 hours to restore the image of the Catholic Church as a force for good in this world than our bishops' conference has done in 10 years. And it was really obvious. And I think it galls them. And so I'm afraid to say, I think there will be more of the same. On the other hand, in talking to several bishops last night, they felt if this statement had been debated on the floor of the conference, it would have been defeated because of the statements that we did see publicly from Cardinal Supich, from Cardinal O'Malley, from Bishop McElroy, all distancing themselves from the statement that Archbishop Gomez had put out. I would challenge the bishops. They have this ad hoc committee to how to deal with Biden. They should disband that. I think that would be a good first move. And if they're going to continue doing this, they at least have to run everything by, he now has a pastor. The Washington, D.C. has a pastor. His name is Cardinal Wilton Gregory. And so if they have pastoral concerns about Joe Biden's soul, they need to contact Cardinal Gregory and let him handle it. And I think he'll handle it in a much more Christ-like and compassionate and pastoral manner than that very aggressive and obnoxious statement we saw yesterday.
I would just add one thing to Michael Shawn's account, and that is Pope Francis's response to the inauguration was dramatically different, and a warm welcome to President Biden. And I think that sets the tone and is totally in keeping with Fratelli Tutti, Laudato Si. I mean, all of Pope Francis's teaching were embodied in that inaugural address. And the tension in the U.S. church that was lifted up in Massimo Fagioli's new book about Biden's Catholicism is critically important, because the issue is not about Biden. The issue is about the American Catholic Church and the struggle for conservative dominance within the Catholic tradition, as opposed to Vatican II. So that's the struggle, but it's a church struggle, not the politics.
Good point, Sister Simone. And we have a viewer who's asking, how should we cover Biden as a Catholic president? And you're right, we will cover him as a leader. I wrote a column about this for NCR about how we're going to still pay attention to what he's doing and hold him accountable. On the other hand, some of these are really more stories about what's going on in the church than with Biden. On Biden's first day, he signed a series of executive orders last night, some of them about the environment. We have a piece about that on our website, Earthbeat, but also a number of them had to do with immigration. So about the border wall, the Muslim ban. Senator Kane, you wrote in your piece for us about how you hope that the Biden administration makes America an island of mercy for immigrants and refugees, drawing on Pope Francis's words. Why is this such an important issue, and what are you hoping to see going forward with this and other issues?
Heidi, I was so thrilled that NCR, you guys agreed to ask many of us to write pieces, and it's so hard to pick an issue, but because I lived in Honduras and worked with Jesuit missionaries there in 1980 and 81 and maintained such a strong tie to Central America especially, I'm just really struck by the church's strong ongoing ministry to new Americans and the growing and really revitalizing aspect of the American church that is our Latino population. Pope Francis's words are really interesting. He asks for us to be an island of mercy in the midst of a sea of indifference. It's interesting. He doesn't juxtapose mercy and hatred or mercy and xenophobia. He really is in many ways criticizing indifference and bystanderism as sort of the disease of the day. And as he talks about refugees, immigrants, and others, he's saying we should battle for them to fight against the indifference that surrounds us. We haven't done comprehensive immigration reform since 1986. It's way overdue. We don't like it. And it's funny, when you haven't done the work for a long time, you don't like the status quo. So we don't like the status quo, meaning, and then we won't enforce the status quo, but we haven't had the backbone and the courage to then change the status quo with immigration reform. One of my pains as a naive incoming senator in 2013 was I worked very hard on bipartisan immigration reform in the Senate. We got nearly 70 votes, very bipartisan. I gave a speech on the Senate floor entirely in Spanish explaining the bill, found out later that nobody had ever given a speech in the Senate in any language other than English. And then I assumed it would go to the House, then Republican, with a Catholic speaker, Paul Ryan, but then we would end up finding a compromise. They wouldn't just do what we did, but we would find a compromise. Instead, the House never took it up. I am so excited that Joe Biden in executive orders, but also in proposed legislation, is saying we're going to do this. And there are so many aspects of immigration reform, even the tough ones, asylees and refugees, and path to citizenship. There's so many issues where we have found common ground and we can find it again. And it would be great for our economy. It would be true to our origins as a nation of immigrants. It would be honoring what Pope Francis has asked us to do. And so I'm really excited about the opportunity that is a bipartisan one ahead of us on this issue.
Do you have any concerns that impeachment proceedings might get in the way of some of this legislation that you're hoping to pursue? What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. My top priorities right now are confirming Joe Biden's cabinet, because look, we have federal agencies that have been hollowed out, and we have to get a leadership team in place. We're dealing with a public health crisis of a century, an economic crisis, a racial justice crisis. So we've got to confirm key appointees. And then we have to tackle important priorities right out of the gate, COVID relief. And I'm very worried, and have expressed this concern to House and Senate leadership. There has to be accountability for January 6th. I spoke some scarily prescient words in February, on the 4th of February, when I declared I would vote for impeachment. I said, unchallenged evil spreads like a virus. That was on February before anyone had died in the country of coronavirus. But that was why I voted for impeachment. If you don't have a consequence for evil behavior, you get more of it. So there has to be accountability, but I would hope that the leaders of the House and Senate, together with the administration, would try to figure out a way in the timing of it, or in the management of these articles of impeachment, which haven't come to the Senate yet. The House doesn't have to send them to us right away. I'm kind of hoping that they may hold off until we get the cabinet secretaries approved and maybe tackle some of the COVID bill. Even if they do send it to us, maybe there's some things that we can do that can make it not such an intrusion into the results that Americans are asking for right now in a time of suffering.
Thank you for that, for those insights. Sister Simone, so the piece that you wrote for us in the Building a Common Future series looked at how tax policy and other policies could help workers, especially low-income workers. Tell us a little bit about why that's a priority, or you think it should be a priority for Biden's first 100 days.
Well, again, this is one of those areas where I think we're going to need, I know we need congressional action. So it needs to be a piece of the COVID package. And what COVID-19 has dramatically illustrated is that the economy and the stock market are two different realities. And there are the people that are benefiting, it's about 15% of the population, maybe as much as 20, that own any interest in the stock market. They have done very well. However, it's everybody else that has been faced catastrophe in so many ways, with reduced wages, reduced salaries, with loss of jobs, loss of income. I mean, it goes over and over and over. And what is being said by some members of Congress is, oh, we can't possibly do another bill because we don't have the money. We're a poor nation, you know? That is an unpatriotic lie, and we need to push on that, because, just FYI, the last years that I could find available is that the Fortune 500 companies like General Electric, Amazon, Chevron, Halliburton, they did not pay a dime of taxes in 2018. Yet they benefited dramatically from our nation and from who we are. To me, it is immoral that we do not have everyone pay their fair share. I'm happy to pay my taxes. I work for a C4, I'm a Catholic sister, I pay my taxes. But it's for the common good. And so for me, it is a moral issue brought home by the pandemic, that when conservatives make this, I was going to call it a negative name. You insert word for as negative as you can think of, argument that we can't afford it as a nation. We cannot afford not to. And one of the things I'm excited about is Janet Yellen's ideas about how to use Treasury for caring for the poor. And I think this can really help us move forward if we shift from the idea that the stock market is who we are, as opposed to the economic consequences for the majority of our people.
Thank you, Sister Simone. And you did a great job of highlighting the importance of the common good from Catholic social teaching, which is a thread that runs through all of these pieces in the Catholic Advice to Biden series. Michael, you talked in your piece, which ran this week, about your advice for Biden had to do with his role as head of state and how he might be able to unify the country and help heal some relationships. Unity was a big theme yesterday in his inaugural address. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
I do, but first I also want to add one extra point to Sister Simone's, which is I do think that for President Biden, and I think really for people who care about democracy, job number one is to make sure we do not have a repeat of Trumpism. And part of that is addressing the income inequality. Because I got to tell you, when people hear Amazon paid no taxes, they're going to reach for their pitchfork. And if we don't have an answer, some form of, we're going to redo the tax code so that everybody is paying a fair share, we risk a redux and a repeat of Trumpism. And this is job one across the board. And there's a policy angle for it. And then there is, as I wrote on Wednesday morning, there is this the part of the job that really didn't actually seem to appeal to Donald Trump. And you saw it the night before the inauguration. Part of a president's job is, in the face of catastrophes, as the president and vice president, the only two people that are elected by the whole country, and we don't have a monarch, or in some countries, the president is a ceremonial position. The head of state is distinct from the head of government. We don't have that. And so it behooves the president. The president is the person who has to speak for the country. And for a year of COVID, we've waited for someone to bring us together and just, articulate the pain we were all feeling. And Trump was incapable of that. And that's part of we're all Catholics, right? We understand the importance of symbols and the importance of ritual. And that very simple ritual. And I thought Cardinal Gregory's prayer was beautiful. I thought the lighting along the reflecting pool was beautiful. I thought the president spoke well. The singing was beautiful. It just, we need that. And I think you will see in the months ahead, when President Biden goes to France at some point and goes to the graves at Normandy, and you'll remember Trump declined to go to the cemetery at Normandy because all the losers were buried there. And, as I put in my piece, there aren't even Democrats or Republicans buried at Anzio and Normandy. Americans are buried. And as the head of state, I think Biden, who was on the Foreign Relations Committee, was chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, was vice president, is totally comfortable with the idea of representing the country and its best on a foreign soil. That in turn is how you help rebuild democracy at home, by reminding us of previous sacrifices. Wasn't it nice to see a speech by a president where he didn't spend the whole time patting himself on the back? It's been 4 years.
Yeah. So, Michael, you bring up issues of foreign relations and other countries, and a couple of our listeners, Senator Kane, have wanted to ask you a little bit more about your experiences when you did the volunteer work in Honduras and how that influences you in terms of how we should deal with some of the poorest countries in the world and also how it might affect how you think about immigration policy going forward. A questioner said concerns about maybe people seeing it as support for open borders or lawlessness. Tell us how your experiences in Honduras help you to understand these issues today for Biden going forward.
Well, Heidi, that would take me about 2 hours. It was like the transformative year of my life because, you know, I grew up in a very comfortably middle class, mostly Irish Catholic neighborhood in Kansas City, and now I was in the second poorest country in the hemisphere with these Jesuit missionaries. First experience of poverty, first experience outside the United States, needing to grasp and learn a new language. I mean, it was so powerful, but also witnessing the profound faith life of the folks I worked with and my students in my little school where I taught welding and carpentry. I think it taught me a couple of things that bear on my work. I'm on the Foreign Relations Committee, the Health, Education, Labor, Pension Committee, the Armed Services Committee, and the Budget Committee. On foreign relations, it taught me America spends way too much time thinking that the world only has an east-west axis and it doesn't have a north-south axis. And frankly, I would make that critique of Democratic and Republican presidents. Their secretaries of state go to Europe over time, Soviet Union, Russia, China, the Middle East, Japan, but the attention to Africa and Central and South America tends to be episodic. Our America's policy throughout our history has almost always been the Monroe Doctrine. We want to keep Europe out of the Americas, or we got to fight the Soviet Union during the Cold War. It's never even really been about the Americas. It's been about others. And then we pay attention when there's a caravan, and then when the caravan goes away, we quit paying attention. So I challenged Tony Blinken the other day in his hearing to be Secretary of State. Let's have an all Americas policy, you know, from Tierra del Fuego to the Yukon. The U.S., with 300 million people, it's hard for us to match up against a China as a global competitor with 1 billion plus. But the Americas, and we're all Americans, you know, we all call ourselves North, Central, or Southern. We all call ourselves Americans. We got about 1 billion people. The more we do together as equals and friends and allies with deep cultural connections, I think it's not only the just thing to do, I think it is a strategic value for us. So that was a powerful thing. And look, the Americas have all kinds of challenges. The Venezuelan challenge is so tough, and then it imperils a growing and nascent, improving Colombia. The Northern Triangle countries, corruption, violence, poverty. The U.S. is complicit. We're very connected to the pain in a Honduras that causes Honduras to basically export families and young people to come to our country, because U.S. thirst and appetite for drugs sends cash south that then corrupts these societies in such ways that the judges and the law enforcement and the police and the gangs imperil life for everyone. And then a parent has to decide maybe their kid would be better off somewhere else than staying in the place where they were born and would rather live. So we're intimately connected. And I hope that a Biden administration will, you know, decide that an all America's policy, or more generally, that there's a Southern hemisphere in this world, and it's not all about the East-West travel that secretaries of state and presidents normally do, but it's about a vibrant and growing Southern hemisphere that we should be connected with.
Thank you for that. It's great to hear your insights and what you're thinking about going forward. We're getting close to the end of our time here, so I thought I'd just ask one final question. A number of questioners have asked about how we can come together, whether in our church or as a country, to move forward. And I just wanted to see if any of you had any last parting advice about that. Michael, you want to go first?
I think it's very important that we reach out to people that we know who supported President Trump. You know, losing elections are hard. I've certainly been trying to reach out, and it's not hard to figure out like who you can reach and who you can't. Like there are people who are like, I don't want to hear it, talk to the hand, and there are other people who, I have a friend and he's a small businessman, and we were talking about taxes, Sister Simone, one day, and I just kind of, gave class social teaching, and he said, "Oh my God, nobody's ever explained it to me that way." And I do think that we as Catholics have a real, Second Vatican Council said the church is supposed to be a sacrament in the world. And it's a sacrament of unity in the world, right? And so I think that we as Catholics are especially called to try to help bring people together. And we have this amazing lens through which to view political issues called Catholic social teaching. Hearing you talk, Senator, about this North-South issue, I'm thinking, yeah, guess what? Papa Francesco has something to say on this also. So I think it's the time is so ripe, and we have to be firm. We have to be clearly spoken. We have to speak truthfully about how we view things. But I know a lot of people who voted for President Trump who are good and decent people. I think they were taught to believe some things that were false. I think they need to question some of their own news sources. But I do find when over a glass of wine or a beer and some food, a lot of ground can be common ground can be found.
Thank you, Sister Simone.
Well, I love that, over a little bit of food and a little bit of wine. Isn't that Eucharist? Isn't that how we come together, where we share the suffering of our time and then try to find a way forward together? One of the things that we did on our virtual Nuns on the Bus in advance of the election this past year was we did dialogues across geographic divides. And what we did was we got a few people from an urban setting, a few people from a rural setting in the state, and then I created kind of a conversation together. And I'll never forget in Michigan, where Southwest Michigan and Detroit. And Detroiters were so surprised to find out that Southwest Michigan in the rural community had a problem with abandoned housing. Really? Because Detroit has a terrible problem. And then the Southwest Michiganders were really surprised to find out that Detroit had a problem with public transit, because they always thought the city had it made. Well, they don't. And finally, they both had trouble, and were surprised to find out that the other did, with healthcare moving away from the urban core or the rural communities to more either suburban or exurban. And what happened in those conversations, just about their lived experience, was that feelings softened and people woke up to something different. So my hunch is that Pope Francis is absolutely right when he calls us to a politics of encounter. Not encounter in the sense of listen to my answer, rather where we ask questions and let people speak of their own experience. And in that speaking, I think then people can feel seen and heard. And that's where conversion happens, is in being seen and heard. So I hold out hope for that. And one last piece is on the issue, this blessed issue that has broken our church apart, is the political obsession with the criminalization of abortion on the part of a few. I want, I don't know if it's NCR's role or somebody's role, to interview President Biden about what he thinks. Because he has I know from a conversation with him, he has a very developed approach to it. And for him, it hinges on religious liberty, and that he will not force his religious belief on the whole nation. And the far right is glomming on to this religious liberty argument. Maybe there's a way forward there where we could find some understanding. So that would be my hope. Not a big hope, but that's my hope.
Thank you, Sister Simone. I love how you bring abortion into our way to come together. You're always optimistic. And Senator Kane,
foolhardy, I think it is.
Yeah. Senator Kane, can you give us some your final thoughts on maybe how we can come together as a country?
Yes, I can, and I'll offer a hopeful piece and then maybe a challenge. So, and the hopeful piece is about who we are as Catholics. If you just do a little sociological experiment, you find a church and drive through their parking lot on a Sunday. At a Catholic church, you're going to see bumper stickers of a lot of different political stripes. No matter who the bishop is or who the priest is, you're going to see in a parking lot of Catholic church different kinds of political bumper stickers. You might go to other churches and not see that diversity of politics displayed on the bumpers of cars. And so I've often thought about the Catholic, the small c Catholic, there's a universal element. And, you know, I was on a national ticket in 2016 where I felt like the Catholic hierarchy loved the non-religious guy and the one who had left the Catholic Church and couldn't stand the woman Methodist and the guy who was a Catholic. But that's not the way parishioners felt. So I think if we want to come together, it is about listening, dialogue, encounter, as Sister Simone says, but Catholics are together in Mass and in parishes with a wide diversity of political opinions. And so often in the rest of society, everybody self-selects by politics. That's not necessarily the case in most of our parishes, which is good. You know, look, the challenge is, as Sister Simone said, the issue that's been the tough one has been abortion, the criminalization of abortion. But I broaden it to say, because if you read Bishop Gomez's letter, basically he attacked Joe Biden on abortion, contraception, gender, LGBT, human sexuality. You know, now human sexuality is incredibly important, but there's a whole lot of really other important issues. And I will say I'm a proud Catholic. I'd never say I'm a good Catholic, but I'm a better person because I'm a Catholic. But I do believe that it's the narrow focus and intense division on issues of human sexuality, which seem to me to be inextricably related to the fact that we have an all-male priesthood and hierarchy, and how different Catholic social teaching and understanding of these issues might be if we didn't exclude women from equal participation in Catholic leadership. I think you would see a fundamentally different church, and that's still my hope about what I'm going to see, because I'm planning on living a lot longer.
Well, hear to that. You can't. Our NCR readers and viewers always love to hear about more roles, expanded roles for women, as do I. So we've gone a little bit over time today, but we had so much great conversation here among our guests. I want to thank all three of you, Sister Simone, Senator Kane, and Michael Sean Winters. If you would like to see the entire Building a Common Future series, you can go to ncronline.org. You can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please join us next Thursday. We'll have the next in this continuing series of live stream events around this Common Future series. And our guests will be Dwayne David Paul and Michael Vasquez, with our opinion editor, Olga Segura, moderating. Thanks so much and have a great day.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.